Students, here we are on page 5 as we're numbering the pages. This is be day 2, solving equations, variables on both sides, a lesson objective. I can solve, and I'm just going to say multi-step equations. Okay, multi-step equations meaning more than the basic two-step equations. So the opening example is going to talk about what happens when you have variables that appear on both sides of the equation. All right, so I've got two different equations, both that look very similar. Here I've got 7x plus 2x is equal to 63. I'm drawing a line down the equal sign. And then over here, so you got variables on the same side. And then on the right side, you've got variables that appear on both sides of the equation. All right, and what we do is something very, very different for both of them. Let me just try to focus this a little bit. All right, if the variables appear on the same side, they go together. So if you have 7x's and 2x's on one side, well, together you have 9x's equals 63. Okay. Now, I know sometimes we get confused. This is just a simple one-step equation, so the only thing left to do is just divide by 9. Sometimes we forget how that works because very seldom do we have one-step equations anymore. All right, versus what happens when they're on the same side? Well, essentially what has to happen is you have to get them on the same side. So typically what would happen is we're going to take this -2 and we would say move it to the other side. Well, the problem is you can't just move it. You have to take it off of this side. So we're going to take this -2x off. In order to take off a -2x, we have to do the opposite, which is add 2x. Okay, and whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. All right, so we add the 2x to both sides, and we get 7x plus 2x is equal to 9x. All right, and then obviously we'll get the same answer. All right, so that's the difference in the two. All right, so in our first example here, we're going to talk about, does it matter what side you move the variables to? Because I know most of you are probably going to want to move the variables so that you have the x on the left side. X on left. I'm going to put a question mark. All right, so we're going to look at this equation. And let's say, line down the equal sign. This becomes more and more important as we get more complicated equations. So I'm going to move the variable from one side to the other. So what most of you would probably think to do is, well, I like to have x on the left, so I'm going to move the 8x to the left side. Remember, you can't just move it there. You have to take it off here. And to take off an 8x, this one would be minus 8x. So we take off an 8x, we end up with -5x plus 4 equals -16. Remember that negative still with the 16. All right. Now we can solve it just like we would solve, so now subtract 4 from both sides. Okay. 4's are gone. You have -5x on the left. Remember, make sure you're careful with your negatives. If I borrow 16 and I borrow 4 more, I owe 20. Look at all the negatives that are happening here, though. I want you to... All right, so then we divide by -5. And you get x equals, you have a negative divided by a negative. Now remember, this is different. A negative combined with a negative just becomes more negative. A negative divided by a negative becomes a positive. But then once again, look at all the negatives that appear in this. And the most common mistake in equations is negatives. Okay. So the question is, does it matter? So I'm going to let's rewrite the same equation. Make sure you hit pause if you have to, because like I said, I tend to go a little bit fast. And let's suppose I wanted to move the 3 to the other side. And let's just see what happens. So remember, we can't just move the 3x. We need to take it off of this side. So we're going to take off 3x, and whatever we do to one side, we do the other. So on the left side, we have 4. On the right side, we have 8x minus 3x, which is 5x, minus 16. All right. So now we're going to solve for x here. Okay. So I'm going to add 16 to both sides. I get 20. Oh, look, no negatives. All right. So if you look over here on the left, look at all the negatives we ended up with here. All right. So I divide by 5, and I do get the same answer, which means it doesn't matter which side. Okay, so here's just a big piece of advice. All right, and this isn't always going to work, but if you move the smaller x, and I'll put x in quotations because it could be a different variable. I'll move this down so you can see. Move the smaller x, because if you move the smaller x, you're going to minimize the number of negatives that you would have. All right, so what you're going to do at this point is you're going to hit the pause button. Okay, in a second, and this is your first checkpoint, exercise number 1. Okay, actually it's at the top there. All right, so you're going to hit pause, work on exercise 1, and then we'll be back to do exercise 2. Hitting pause now. All right, now that we're back and you've checked in with these 2 answers up here, hopefully you've checked in with me or checked the answer key that I provided. Equations with everything. So this is 2 examples where we have equations that involve everything. So here are the steps. First thing you do is you distribute. Then you combine. Okay? And then you get variables on the same side. And that's why we did this in the order we did. Is we did problems where you distributed, we did problems where you combined, we did variables on the same side. So now we're putting it all together. All right, and we're going to spend a couple days probably in this. So on the left, here we got line down the equal sign, we've got an x here, we got an x there, we've got parentheses, so we have to distribute. So here we're going to distribute the 7. So we get 7x plus 14. Here we're going to distribute the 5. 5x plus 20. Okay. We have variables that appear on both sides of the equation, so I'm going to move the 5x to the left side. Okay, because I'm going to move the smaller, so I'm going to 5 smaller than 7, so I'm going to move the 5x. Remember, you can't just move it, you have to undo it. So we end up with 2x plus 14 is equal to 20. Okay, and from here it should be smooth sailing. You know, subtract 14, 2x equals 6, x equals 3. Basically from here down, I'm going to go really quick because from there it should be smooth sailing. Standard 2-step equation. All right, now we look on the right. And the right looks a lot messier than the left. So this is why it's important about following the steps. Distribute. Okay, so what can be distributed? Here's a set of parentheses. I can distribute this -3. Remember, it is negative. So the 5, nothing happens. I'm just bringing it down. I get -3z, and I have a -3 times a +6. That gives me a -18. Okay. On the right side, there's no distributing to do, but what I can do is I can combine on the right side. So we have to look at distributing and combining on each side of the equation first. So we look at the left side, we look at the right side. Simplify. Okay, on the right side, I can put 1z together with an 8z. That's 9z minus 1. All right. Now on the left, I still have a little bit of work I can do. I can put the 5 together with a -18. So 5 minus 18. So I still have the -3z. And this is -13, 9z minus 1. All right, so now that I've simplified on each side of the equation, now I get to take care of the variables on the same side. Well, -3 is smaller than 9, so I'm going to move the -3 to the other side. But remember, can't just move it. Got to undo it. So I'm going to add this. So I end up with, on the left side, I still got a -13. 9z plus, that's a z, by the way, is 12z minus 1. Right. And then, see on the right side, so I'm going to add 1. Z alone, so we add the 1. -13 plus 1, I borrow 13, pay back 1. I still owe 12, so it's -12 equals 12z. Okay, these are, obviously quite involved steps. And then last step is divide by 12, and we get z is equal to -1. Okay, so we have to simplify each side of the equation. So I distributed and combined it on the left. There was no distributing, I just combined on the right. And then I get the variables on the same side, so I move the -3 to the other side by undoing it here. If it's a -3, you got to add 3. Add 3. Then from here, it's a 2-step equation. The z's on the right. Remember, you got to work outside in, so we go -1. So we got to add 1 to both sides. Divide by 12, we get -1. All right, exercise 2 is checkpoint number 2. This is the end of the video. So after exercise 2, you check in, and then from there you go to some fluency work. So this is Mr. Sims signing off.